he got his breath together, and he looked at me and he said,
As Tupac lay bleeding on the Las Vegas Strip, he whispered something to the officer leaning over him. The words were faint, but chilling enough to make the cop freeze. And to this day, what he said haunts everyone who heard it. Let's break it all down. The fateful night when everything changed. The night of September 7th, 1996, started like any other night in Las Vegas. Bright lights, big crowds, and the electric energy of a major boxing event drawing thousands of spectators from across the country. But by the time the clock struck past midnight and moved into the early morning hours of September 8th, the world of hip-hop would be forever changed, setting into motion a series of events that would leave investigators, fans, and conspiracy theorists puzzling over the details for nearly 3 decades to come. Tupac Shakur, the 25-year-old rap icon, had arrived in Las Vegas that afternoon with his fiancée Kidada Jones and cousin Jamala Lassane, eager to attend the highly anticipated Mike Tyson versus Bruce Seldon heavyweight boxing match at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. The group gambled, prepared for the evening's main event, and secured front row seats to witness what would turn out to be an incredibly brief fight. Tyson knocked out Seldon in the first round around 8:35 p.m., sending the crowd into a frenzy of excitement and disbelief at the speed of the victory. But it was what happened immediately after the fight, in the chaos of the MGM Grand Lobby around 8:50 p.m. that would set the wheels of tragedy into irreversible motion. As the crowd dispersed and hundreds of people flooded through the casino's corridors, Trayvon Trey Lane, a Mob Piru gang member and Death Row Records affiliate, spotted Orlando Baby Lane Anderson near the elevators. This wasn't just a random encounter. Anderson was a member of the Southside Compton Crips, and approximately 2 months earlier, in July 1996, he had allegedly attempted to rob Lane at a Foot Locker store in a Lakewood, California mall, targeting a Death Row pendant necklace, a symbol that represented far more than jewelry. It represented loyalty, allegiance, and respect in the dangerous world where gang life intersected with the music industry. Lane immediately alerted Tupac and the Death Row entourage to Anderson's presence. What happened next was captured on the MGM Grand surveillance cameras, footage that would later become crucial evidence in understanding the events of that tragic night. Tupac confronted Anderson, asking if he was from the South, a question that in the coded language of gang culture was asking if Anderson was affiliated with the Southside Crips. Without waiting for an answer, Tupac punched Anderson, knocking him to the ground, and then Knight and the entire entourage joined in what became a brief but violent assault that lasted less than a minute before MGM Grand security personnel intervened and broke up the altercation. Remarkably, despite the severity of the attack and the clear video evidence of what had transpired, no arrests were made at the scene. Tupac and his group were allowed to leave, and they returned to the Luxor Hotel where they were staying. Back in his room, Tupac excitedly recounted the incident to Kidada Jones and his cousin, his adrenaline still pumping from the confrontation. He changed out of his fight attire into more casual clothes, and in a decision that would later be scrutinized and questioned countless times, he declined to wear his bulletproof vest, citing the oppressive desert heat as his reason for leaving behind the protective gear that had become almost a permanent fixture of his wardrobe after surviving 5 gunshot wounds in a 1994 robbery in New York City. Around 10 p.m., the convoy left Marion Shuge Knight's mansion, heading toward Club 662, a night-owned venue where Tupac was scheduled to perform at a charity event. The caravan consisted of approximately 10 vehicles, with Tupac riding in the front passenger seat of Knight's black 1996 BMW 750 IL sedan. The mood in the car was still high from the night's earlier excitement, with music playing and the anticipation of the performance ahead keeping everyone's spirits elevated. But at approximately 11 o'clock to 11:05 p.m., the BMW was pulled over by Las Vegas Metropolitan Police bike patrol officers on Las Vegas Boulevard. The reason? The car was playing music too loudly and the license plates were missing, though they were later found stored in the trunk of the vehicle. This seemingly minor traffic stop, which lasted only a few minutes and resulted in no citation being issued, would later become one of the most analyzed moments of that entire night. Why? Because this brief delay, this momentary pause in their journey, would position them at a specific intersection at a specific time, a convergence of fate and timing that would prove deadly. At approximately 11:10 p.m., the BMW came to a stop at a red light at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, near the Maxim Hotel. In these final moments of normalcy, Tupac was in good spirits, even playful. A car with 2 women pulled up on the left side of the BMW, and Tupac, ever the charismatic performer, leaned out of his window, exchanged words with them, and invited them to join him at Club 662, flashing his signature smile. The women seemed excited by the invitation, and for a brief moment, everything seemed perfectly normal. Just another night in the life of one of hip-hop's biggest stars, enjoying his fame and the attention that came with it. But then, at precisely 11:15 p.m., a white 4-door late-model Cadillac sedan pulled up on the right side of the BMW, according to Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, who would later confess to his role in the event.
Keefe D and his entourage get into a white Cadillac along with Keefe D. The driver is a guy named Terrence Brown. They call him Bubble Up.
The vehicle also contained.
Behind the driver is DeAndre Smith. He's in the left rear passenger seat. And Keefe D's nephew, Orlando Anderson, who's sitting behind the right front passenger seat. All Southside Crips.
What happened in the next few seconds would change hip-hop history forever. According to witness accounts and later confessions,
Tupac pulled out a gun.
It looked like he was reaching, yeah.
though this detail remains disputed, with some witnesses saying they never actually saw a weapon in Tupac's hands. Keefe D later described the moment.
Once he got the reaching, I got the ducking.
Then, from the back seat of the Cadillac, gunfire erupted. The shooter, later identified by various sources as either Orlando Anderson or DeAndre Smith, though this remains a point of contention, fired at least 13 rounds from a .40 caliber Glock 22. 4 of those bullets found their target, striking Tupac. 2 hit him in the chest. 1 penetrated his right lung, 1 struck his arm, and another hit his thigh. Knight was also hit, sustaining a graze wound to his head from bullet fragments, though his injuries were relatively minor compared to the devastating wounds Tupac had suffered. The Cadillac sped away into the Las Vegas night, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared, leaving chaos and confusion in its wake. The BMW's tires had been punctured by the gunfire, but Knight, despite his head wound and the shock of what had just occurred, managed to maintain enough composure to drive. In what must have seemed like the longest mile of his life, Knight drove approximately 1 mile away from the shooting scene to Las Vegas Boulevard and Harmon Avenue, where the same bike patrol officers who had stopped them earlier for the traffic violation intercepted the vehicle and immediately radioed for paramedics. What the officers found when they reached the BMW was a scene of horror that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Tupac was slumped over, bleeding profusely from multiple gunshot wounds, his life hanging by the most fragile of threads as precious seconds ticked away. The desperate hours between life and death. The chaos of that September night in Las Vegas unfolded with a speed that left even experienced law enforcement officers struggling to process what was happening. Sergeant Chris Carroll, a Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Bike Patrol officer, was working the strip that night, and what began as a routine Saturday evening shift during a Mike Tyson fight would become the most significant and haunting moment of his entire career. Carroll and his team of approximately 12 officers were patrolling on bicycles, not motorcycles, but actual bicycles, which he explains was
the best way. You've probably been down to the strip. You know, the traffic, you can't get many places fast in a car. There's too much traffic. There's also a lot of foot traffic. So a bike is really the best way to get around.
The evening had been busy but manageable. They knew it was a Tyson fight night, which meant the strip would be packed, and they had heard about the altercation at the MGM Grand where Tupac and his entourage had assaulted Orlando Anderson. But as Carroll recalls,
at that moment, didn't mean much. It was like, we talked to security, it's like, hey, there was a fight, everybody's gone, they all left, no one needed to go to the hospital, no one's wanting to press charges.
Then, at approximately 11 p.m., everything changed in an instant. Carroll describes the moment when the emergency call came through.
2 other officers came out on the air and yelled that there were shots fired at the corner of Koval and Flamingo. So they were up in a parking garage. So they were about 5 floors up, so they can kind of see what's going on, but they don't actually see the shots because they're in the garage, but they hear them because they're right there.
What followed was a frantic pursuit through the Las Vegas Strip. The officers reported seeing 6 vehicles fleeing from the scene, but they had no way of knowing who was the victim and who was the shooter.
They don't know anything except somebody's shooting. You know, it turns out there's 14 shots, so in a very short period of time. So, very quick, loud, hard, violent shooting.
A convoy of vehicles, with Tupac's BMW right in the middle, had hit a curb during their escape attempt, blowing out both right side tires and severely damaging the rims. Despite the damage, Suge Knight kept driving, heading directly toward the strip with officers in pursuit. Carroll was riding his bicycle northbound on the strip when the southbound convoy was heading straight toward him. They were on a collision course. What happened next was a moment of pure chaos that Carroll remembers with crystal clarity.
They're going too fast and their tires are blown out. So when they go to hang a left in the intersection, they kind of spin out. They don't kind of spin out, they spin out the intersection, lose control of the vehicle, and the whole entourage comes to a stop. Now, at the same time, I'm coming sliding in on my bike.
The scene that unfolded was extremely tense and dangerous. As soon as the vehicle stopped, approximately 8 men emerged from the convoy, and Carroll found himself alone, outnumbered, in what could easily have become a deadly shootout in the middle of one of the most crowded areas in Las Vegas.
I pulled out my gun, trying to yell at everybody to get on the ground. There's kind of some compliance, but not complete compliance. It's like they're kind of looking at each other, Like, do we listen to this guy? Do we not listen to him? And I thought for sure it was going to be a shootout. And I just thought, I'm going to be in so much trouble. I'm going to be in a shootout in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip.
But then Carroll noticed something. There was still someone sitting in one of the vehicles. As Carroll approached the vehicle with his weapon drawn, he could see the extensive damage from the shooting. Bullet holes clustered tightly around the door handle. The passenger window shattered. Multiple bullet holes in the windshield. The door was difficult to open at first, likely because the bullets had damaged the latch mechanism. Meanwhile, Suge Knight was running around despite having been shot in the head.
His scalp was penetrated, but not his skull. So he's literally got blood flying out the side of his head, but he's running around like nothing's happening, like he's fine, like he doesn't even feel it, he don't even care, and the blood is shooting out the side of his head.
When Carroll finally got the door open, Tupac slumped out with it. The officer caught him with his left hand while keeping his gun trained on the massive bloodied Suge Knight, who was advancing on him.
Suge is yelling at Tupac. He's yelling, "Pac, Pac," and he's yelling at him, and Tupac, I can tell right away he's in bad shape. He's bleeding out of his mouth and nose. He's got multiple torso hits. There's a lot of blood. There's so much blood, I can't even tell exactly where he's hit because there's just, he's bleeding so badly.
It was in this moment, with Tupac lying on the pavement bleeding profusely, that Carroll made the decision to attempt to get a dying declaration, a legally admissible statement from a dying victim identifying their killer.
Most people who are murdered know who their murderer is. And in this case, Tupac was shot probably from 3 feet away. I mean, it's very likely he knows who shot him. So we have something in police work called a dying declaration, and that's if somebody's dying and you can have them say who did it, and they tell you, that's admissible in court.
But getting that information would prove impossible. Tupac was focused on Suge Knight, who was panicking and yelling at him, trying to get his attention. Carroll repeatedly asked, "Who shot you? Who did this?" But Tupac seemed to be ignoring him, more concerned with responding to Suge's yelling. Then, in what would become the most controversial and analyzed moment of the entire incident, something shifted. Carroll describes it with remarkable detail.
All of a sudden, in the instant snap, he went from being, trying to yell, trying to squirm, trying to get Suge's attention, to he just went totally peaceful, like he just totally stopped. And you could tell he reached a point where he physically gave up. He physically was like, nope, can't do it, got it laid there.
For the first time, Tupac seemed to acknowledge Carroll's presence. The officer asked again, "What happened, man? Who shot you? Who did this?" And then came the moment that would be debated and questioned for decades.
He got his breath together and he looked at me and he said, "F you." And after he said it, his eyes kind of rolled back in his head, started gurgling, blood coming out of his mouth and nose, and he slipped out of consciousness. So that would be his last words that he ever said.
The ambulance took approximately 4 minutes to arrive, though to Carroll it felt like an eternity. During that time, there was nothing he could do in terms of first aid. Tupac was still breathing but losing consciousness, bleeding heavily from multiple gunshot wounds. The scene remained chaotic, with cars trying to navigate around them, pedestrians walking past, and the entourage being searched and detained by the few officers who had arrived as backup. When the paramedics finally arrived, they immediately intubated Tupac, inserting tubes down his throat to establish an airway. Both Tupac and the still bleeding out-of-control Suge Knight were loaded into the ambulance, accompanied by 2 police officers. They were transported to University Medical Center, UMC, a state-of-the-art trauma center in Las Vegas. What Carroll learned later from medical personnel would be devastating.
When he got there, he was really dead when he got to the hospital. Because they're a state-of-the-art trauma center, they got his heart going with a machine. So he's got a machine keeping his heart going, but as far as real life and brain activity and stuff, there's nothing.
The final hours and lasting questions. The grim reality that Sergeant Carroll learned from medical staff painted a picture far different from the public narrative of Tupac fighting for his life in the hospital. According to the trauma center personnel, Tupac was essentially deceased upon arrival, with only machines keeping his heart pumping while his brain showed no meaningful activity. This medical assessment stands in stark contrast to accounts from visitors like Kadada Jones and even Suge Knight himself, who described conversations and moments of consciousness during Tupac's hospital stay. The question of what truly happened in those 6 days at University Medical Center adds another layer to the already complex mystery. Kidada Jones, Tupac's fiancée, visited regularly, playing music for him, including Don McLean's Vincent, and at one point claimed he briefly regained consciousness, his eyes swollen and filled with mucus from medical interventions, opening slightly as she whispered that she loved him. Suge Knight has offered his own accounts of visiting Tupac in the hospital, claiming they had conversations and even joked together. In his 1996 MTV interview, Knight described the immediate aftermath of the shooting.
Pac said he was shot. I'm like, you shot? I'm gonna get you to the hospital. I'm driving, telling him I'm gonna get to the hospital, kick back. Pac looked at me and said, you know what? You need the doctor more than me. You the one shot in your head. And we laughed the whole time.
However, these accounts of Tupac being conscious and conversational are extraordinarily difficult to reconcile with both Carroll's eyewitness testimony that Tupac had essentially lost consciousness at the scene and the medical staff's assessment that he arrived at the hospital with no meaningful brain activity. Medical experts have expressed significant skepticism about the accuracy of these recollections, suggesting that perhaps the memories have been colored by time, grief, and the profound trauma of the experience. The question remains, were these moments of consciousness real, or were they the desperate interpretations of loved ones seeing what they wanted to see in the involuntary movements and responses of a body being kept alive by machines? The medical facts, as documented in official records, show that Tupac underwent multiple emergency surgeries, 3 in total, including the removal of his entire right lung to control massive internal bleeding. Doctors removed approximately 2 liters of blood from his chest cavity, and his survival odds, which initially stood at 50-50, plummeted to approximately 20% as complications mounted over the 6-day period. On September 13, 1996, at 4:03 p.m., after consulting with doctors who informed her that there was no realistic hope of recovery, Afeni Shakur made the agonizing decision to discontinue life support measures. In more recent years, Suge Knight has made additional controversial claims, suggesting that Tupac begged to die in the hospital, fearing a return to prison more than death itself, and that Afeni provided pills and instructed doctors to let her son go, claims that remain unverified and have been disputed by other sources close to the situation. The investigation that followed Tupac's death became one of the most scrutinized and controversial cases in American criminal justice history, plagued from the beginning by the very issue that Sergeant Carroll encountered at the scene: non-cooperation. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Sergeant Kevin Manning would later lament that the investigation stalled early due to witnesses being clammed up, adhering to the street code of no snitching that made it nearly impossible to gather the testimony needed to build a prosecutable case. Years later, Carroll had an opportunity to verify his account of that night when he participated in a show where he encountered Edi Amin, a member of the Outlaws who had been in Tupac's entourage that night. Carroll recalls the moment with a sense of relief.
So I thought for sure when I told my story in front of him, I thought for sure he's going to say, no, that didn't happen, this didn't happen, blah, blah, blah. Because people see things differently, especially me and him being at two completely opposite ends of the spectrum, and they're being years later, stories change over the years and stuff. And I told my whole story. He never interrupted once. And when I was done, I told the story just like I told you. We looked at him and the camera looked at him and he goes, yeah, that's pretty much it.
This corroboration is significant because it validates Carroll's controversial account of Tupac's final words, though it doesn't resolve the larger question of why Tupac chose defiance over cooperation, assuming that's truly what happened. Some medical experts have pointed out that if Tupac was as severely wounded as described, with bullets having penetrated his chest cavity and lung, he may have been physically incapable of speaking clearly at all, making the exchange physiologically questionable. But the most significant development in the case came not from Carroll's testimony or from any traditional police work, but from the confessions of Dwayne Keefe D. Davis himself. Over the years following the shooting, Keefe D. gave multiple interviews and wrote a memoir in 2019 titled Compton Street Legend, in which he detailed his role in the events of that night, describing how he procured the gun and how the 4 men in the Cadillac had been seeking revenge after the MGM Grand beating. On September 29, 2023, nearly 27 years after Tupac's death, Keefe D. was arrested and charged with murder with a deadly weapon and gang enhancement. The arrest represented a breakthrough in what had seemed like a permanently cold case, but it also highlighted the complexity of building a prosecution almost entirely on the defendant's own words, with no physical evidence and all other potential witnesses deceased. Keefe D. has since pleaded not guilty and claimed that his previous confessions were fabricated for entertainment and financial gain, arguing that he was never actually in Las Vegas on the night of the shooting. His trial has been repeatedly delayed, most recently pushed to February 2026, as both sides navigate the unprecedented challenge of prosecuting a case based almost entirely on public public admissions made decades after the crime. The significance of Tupac's alleged final words, "you," extends far beyond the specific exchange between a dying man and a police officer. If those words were indeed what Tupac said, they represent something profound about his character, his worldview, and the cultural forces that shaped him. Throughout his career, Tupac had been outspoken about police brutality, systemic racism, and what he perceived as a criminal justice system designed to oppress people of color. His music was filled with confrontational messages directed at law enforcement, and his personal history included multiple negative encounters with police. From this perspective, Tupac's defiant response, if accurate, could be seen as the ultimate expression of authenticity, a refusal to cooperate with a system he fundamentally didn't trust, even in his final moments of consciousness. It would mean that Tupac, facing certain death, chose to remain true to his principles, rather than seek justice through the very system he had spent his career criticizing and condemning. But there's another way to interpret this moment, one that's perhaps more tragic. Snoop Dogg, who had been friends with Tupac despite tensions toward the end, later described the profound regret he felt about not being able to reconcile before Tupac's death, saying,
"And anytime you got a relationship with somebody and it's like, it's working, it's going good, and then y'all get an argument, then the die. Like, come on, man. I didn't even get a chance, whether I was wrong or right, just to be able to get that follow-up."
Perhaps Tupac's final words weren't a political statement or a principled stand, but simply the confused, pain-addled response of a 25-year-old man whose body was in catastrophic shock, whose blood was pouring out onto the Las Vegas pavement, and whose brain was being deprived of oxygen. Perhaps they were the words of someone who, in that moment, was simply too hurt, too scared, and too disoriented to process what was happening or to make a rational decision about cooperation. The truth is that we may never know with absolute certainty what Tupac meant by those words, assuming he said them at all. What we do know is that his death represented an incalculable loss, not just to hip-hop, but to culture, activism, and art. His mother, Afeni, captured this sentiment beautifully when she reflected on her grief.
"I don't want to ask for too much, to ask for more than I was supposed to have. I thank God for every day of those 25 years.
As we approach the 30th anniversary of Tupac Shakur's death, the case remains technically open, with Keefe D's trial pending, and the possibility that some measure of justice might finally be served. But even if Keefe D is convicted, even if we finally have legal accountability for what happened on that September night in Las Vegas, the larger existential questions will remain unanswered.